Christ is among us.
Yes, I shall.
Good morning, everybody. God bless you. Thank you for coming today. And now for something completely different. Did you ever have a dog or a cat that snuck out of the house or got out of the backyard and went out and got lost and astray? You ever have that happen? There's when you realize the door was open or the fence was open or something, there's that immediate feeling of dread and panic, and you start rushing out into the neighborhood, madly crying out with a helpless cry the name of your pet, which probably sounds really bizarre at that moment. You wonder to yourself, will my precious ever come back? Will they get hurt? Will they be hungry? Will they be cold? What will happen to my beloved pet? And then, like a shining knight, your neighbor from down the street comes walking up, carrying the animal in their hands or maybe pulling by the collar, and you cry out in ecstasy, my dog is found, my cat is safe, whatever it was. There are few acts that our neighbors can do for us that bring such comfort and relief. But as you can imagine, these are pretty much first world problems. If the greatest dread and panic you have in your life is when your doggie gets out, you're doing pretty good for yourself. In the ancient world, people might have had pets. It doesn't seem to be a real issue in the historical record, but we know those Egyptians loved their cats at least, right? But they certainly had animals, and including dogs and cats. But dogs and cats at that time were working animals, just like the rest of the house's livestock, the cattle and the sheep and the goats and the chickens and all the rest, right? And so if your ox or your donkey or your sheep managed to get out of its enclosure and to run away and get loose, it wasn't just a comfort animal or a house pet that was in danger, but in fact, it was like losing your car or your truck or your tractor. Your means of livelihood was at stake. It was like if you lost a sheep, you were losing both your closet and your refrigerator in one, right? Because you get that sheep's milk and you make the cheese, and then you shave its hair and make some clothes. You lose your sheep, you're out both dinner and the dinner outfit. All animals were working animals. To lose just one could be an extraordinary hardship and put you at risk of poverty. So it's a very serious issue. And not surprisingly then, the care of livestock is actually one of the central themes of the Torah. We don't normally think of it now, the law of Moses as being primarily concerned with livestock, but there's an awful lot of references to livestock in the law. They even make it into the Ten Commandments, right? You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor your neighbor's servant, nor their ox or their donkey. Wow. It was that up there. It was that high up there, showing how important the ox and the donkey was to the daily life of a family, and how the evil of covetousness could even be drawn to them. Now, how many of us have neighbors who own an ox or a donkey at this time? Anybody? Nobody? I know we have some parishioners who moved out into the country in Maryland and they have chickens, but I don't know if anybody has an ox or a donkey next to them. But we might still suffer covetousness with regards to our neighbor's possessions, right? They might get a nice new car, or they might be riding a sweet riding lawnmower while we're still just pushing the old jalopy around, or they might even have a boat or a jet ski or something like that, right? And we start to feel that envious quality. We think, oh, I wish I had that. In the Torah, the care of your neighbor's livestock, not just your own, but your neighbor's livestock, was not just limited to guarding yourself against being jealous and having an internal sin of covetousness towards them. You were actually expected to take personal responsibility for them if you saw them in trouble or in danger. So, for example, in Exodus 23, even if it's your neighbor that you don't like, even if it's your enemy, you're still required to take care of their animal if you see it in danger. So, in verse 4, if you meet your enemy's ox and his donkey going astray, you shall surely bring it back to him again. Your beef with your neighbor does not give you the right to be insensitive to the care of God's creature. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying under its burden, meaning it's been like overwhelmed by the burden, the pack that it's on it, and you would refrain from helping it, you shall surely help him with it. So even if he's struggling, like he's put too much on his poor donkey and the donkey's stuck and it won't go, you can't sit there and go, ha, serves you, jerk. You've got to get in there and help your enemy. That's the law of God. In Deuteronomy 22, the law expands on this to the extent that you should go to help your neighbor. It says in verse 4, you shall not see your brother's donkey or his ox fall down along the road and hide yourself from them. You shall surely help him lift them up again. So it's like that. The Good Samaritan story has a resonance with this, right? Where the priest and the Levite go by on the other side. They hide themselves from the person who's stuck on the road. Now, if the law commands you to help even the donkey that's stuck on the side of the road, how much more then should the priest and the Levite help the person who had fallen by the wayside, right? Even though it was someone that they would have maybe considered an enemy. In Exodus 21, we read that you are responsible for the animal if, because of your actions, it gets hurt or it's killed, just as you might be responsible in an automobile accident. So the law says if a man opens a pit, digs a pit, and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls in it, the owner of the pit shall make it good. He shall give money to their owner, but the dead animal shall be his. Oops. Spoiler alert. If a donkey or an ox would fall into a pit, there probably wasn't any getting it out again. It was either broken its legs and it was going to die, or it was already dead. So, like in a car accident, if you total the other person's vehicle, nowadays we have insurance. But under the Torah, you would have to pay the replacement cost, but at least you get the spare parts to sell. That's the modern equivalent of the law. So the law teaches us mercy and care for the good of our neighbor. To love our neighbor is one of the key ways in which we show our love for God. That's why that whole Good Samaritan story begins. What is the most important commandment? Love the Lord your God, love your neighbor. The two of them, on them rests the whole law. This aspect of the law, the love of one's neighbor, trumps all the other lesser aspects of the law that have to do with individual observances that affect only you, right? Thus, to understand the Sabbath and the observing of the Sabbath, you actually have to understand it in the context of loving your neighbor. The reason that God gave us the Sabbath was not simply so that we could have a break. But read what the law says in Exodus 23. The Sabbath must be observed not just for oneself, but those who serve us. So verse 12, 6 days you shall do your work, and on the seventh day you shall rest. Why? That your ox and your donkey may rest, and the son of your female servant, and the stranger may be refreshed. What does it mean by stranger there? That's translating foreigner, xenos, the person who is not a Jew, who works for you. So the Jew might have all these servants, including people who were themselves not even Jews. They needed a day off too. So the Sabbath was not just for the Jew to be able to enjoy synagogue or something. It was so everybody could get a rest. The whole earth could get a rest from the labors of agriculture and so forth. Okay. So the Bible loves oxes and donkeys, right? Why am I telling you any of this to you? If you were paying attention to today's gospel reading, you might already be connecting the dots, right? You can perhaps see the subtext of what is going on here when Jesus heals the woman on the Sabbath. It's something that he did regularly. This is not the first time, and it would not be the last. And he was criticized every time for working on the Sabbath when he healed people, breaking the violation of the observance of the Sabbath, as if he were some kind of itinerant, country doctor making his rounds, plying his craft. And so Jesus' response to them is to appeal to the very same law that they are quoting at him. 6 days you shall do work. But what does the rest of the verse say? So that your ox and your donkey may rest, and your servants and the stranger may be refreshed. So the Sabbath rest is not just for the observance of the individual, but to be a help and a comfort to those who are laboring and in affliction, right? Who need refreshment. These commandments to help animals in distress, who are trapped or lost or overburdened or broken and hurt, does not get canceled just because it is the Sabbath day. They're actually a higher law. Even the simplest care of animals is given on the Sabbath day, leading them to drink, to get some water, to refresh themselves, is part of the Sabbath observance and is not forbidden. In Luke 14, the very next chapter, Jesus does it again. He heals a man who has a form of paralysis, and he then turns immediately, before they can even say anything, and he throws it in their face, the lawyers and the Pharisees, and he says, so, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Which of you, having a donkey or an ox that has fallen into a pit, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? I like to think that's because they were hoping to save the ox or donkey, but I suspect it's because they wanted to make sure the meat didn't go bad. Because as we saw, it wasn't good if it fell into a pit. And they could not answer him regarding these things, it says, because they knew he was right. They did the same thing when it came to their animals of burden. Therefore, how could they forbid Christ the Master from doing the same thing to people, showing mercy on people who were afflicted? Thus, if we are called to show simple mercy to our neighbor by caring for his animal, even on the Sabbath, or just even to the animals that serve us, should we not also show mercy to our fellow human beings? And that's the Lord's argument, right? He says, so ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, not just an ox or a donkey, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath? Should she not also be released and be refreshed? And when he said these things, all his adversaries were put to shame, and the multitude rejoiced for the glorious things that were done by him. In connecting the law about oxen and donkeys, about the animals, to this woman, Christ is actually not only showing them the deeper meaning of the law, but he's also revealing something about himself. Something that was revealed in the prophets. Something, if you look around the room, and if you can find where the ox and the donkey is in the room, you will know what I'm talking about. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Can you point to the ox and the donkey in the room? In the icon of the Nativity of Christ, there is the cave. The stable was a cave in the ancient Near East. And inside is Christ in the manger, the crib that was made for him. And who's gazing upon him besides the three wise men and the angels? The ox and the donkey. And that is to fulfill the prophecy of Isaiah in the very first chapter, where it says, the ox knows its owner, and the donkey its master's crib. But Israel does not know, nor my people consider. So the comparison in Isaiah, the judgment on Israel, was that they did not recognize their master. They did not recognize their creator when he came among them. But the ox and the donkey knew, and they recognized, and they're now part of the Christmas story. And every year we have our Christmas pageants, right? And every year one of the roles that you can play is the ox or the donkey. God willing, if you do the nativity scene, right? Yet there were signs for the people of God to recognize the master, signs given through the prophets over and over again. And when Christ came, and when he began his public ministry, after he was tempted in the desert, he came back to Nazareth, and there he gave his first reading of the prophets, and he gave his first sermon about it. And it was really quick and it was really short. And it was this. He read from the prophet Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Then he closed the book, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down, and the eyes of all who were in the synagogue were fixed on him, and he began to say to them, today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. That was the homily. Mic drop. Done. There's one thing that he didn't actually include, though, interestingly enough, from that line in Isaiah. Do you know what it is? What was the last thing that was also he came to do? To open the prisons and set free the captives. That wasn't fulfilled that day in the synagogue, but it was fulfilled later on the cross and in the resurrection. That's when the prison of Hades was opened and the captives set free. So in healing the woman bound by Satan with an infirmity, and any of the people that he freed from their afflictions on the Sabbath days, Christ is once again fulfilling the law. And by fulfilling, I mean filling it to overflowing. He's bringing the fullness of what the law was meant to be right in front of us and showing us what we were called to be. He's not breaking the law. He's not abrogating the law. He's not suspending the law. He's fulfilling it totally and completely in his love and his mercy. He reveals in that his character and his purpose as the lawgiver, the Lord, the Master, our God. And as brothers and sisters, we approach the celebration of our Lord's Nativity, we are invited once again to come before the Master's crib, to gaze upon him with wonder. Will we have the wisdom and humility of the donkey or the ox? I pray that each and every one of you this year will be an ass at Christmas and have that kind of humility and love for your Master, and look upon him with love. Let us not be those who remain lost in the pit of our sinfulness, bound to Satan through our pride and our insensitivity to our neighbor. Let us be like the ox and the donkey. Let us fulfill the law in ourselves. Christ is among us.
He is now.